AU language sleuth. You've really dug deep into Norwegian this time. And I've got to say, you've picked a fascinating one. It's got history, it's got mystery, and did you know it even has tones?
It's true. Norwegian is like a linguistic puzzle box, with layers upon layers of history echoing in its words and grammar. And yes, those tones add a whole other dimension. It's part of what drew me to it years ago.
All right, so the language I'm trying to learn, Norwegian, you're telling me it has roots that go all the way back to this Proto-Indo-European ancestor. That's wild. I always figured languages would have more, well, distinct origins. Like, what kind of clues about Norwegian can we even find by looking that far back?
More than you might think. Proto-Indo-European is like this massive linguistic family tree, and even though it's from thousands of years ago, we can trace branches of it all the way to languages we speak today.
Okay, hold on. So we're talking languages as different as English, Spanish, even Hindi, all sharing a common ancestor with Norwegian. That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And just like those family resemblances you sometimes see in people, we can find similar traces in the way these languages structure their grammar, certain sounds. They share even common words that have evolved over time.
Huh. So it's like finding those little aha moments where you see how a word in Norwegian might actually be a distant cousin to a word I know in English.
Precisely. And it's even more apparent when we start looking at the Viking Age and the language they spoke, Old Norse.
Okay, now we're getting into the Viking Age. And I have to admit, this is the part I was most curious about when I started looking into Norwegian. It's got that epic, almost mythical feeling to it. I even read a bit about the Elder Futhark runes, and they weren't just for carving onto weapons, were they? What kind of insights did they give us into how Norwegians, or at least the Vikings who lived in what is now Norway, communicated back then?
It's fascinating, really. Those runes, the Elder Futhark, were more than just cool-looking symbols. They were a writing system, a way for them to record everything from stories and poems to legal matters and even everyday messages.
Oh, wow. So instead of picking up a quill and parchment, they were carving these angular runes onto pieces of wood or stone. I wonder what their handwriting looked like.
We can actually get glimpses of that. And by studying the inscriptions on runestones, which were often used as memorials or markers, we can piece together how Old Norse sounded, how their grammar worked, even what they valued.
That's incredible. But the Vikings, they were known for their voyages for reaching far-off lands. Didn't that spread their language too?
Absolutely. The Viking Age wasn't just about raids and conquests. It was a time of incredible expansion and exploration. They sailed to Iceland, Greenland. They even reached North America. And their language, Old Norse, went with them.
So what happened? Why didn't Old Norse become the language of, well, at least half of Europe and part of North America?
Well, in most of those places, Old Norse eventually faded, replaced by other languages, or evolving into distinct dialects. But in Norway, something really interesting happened.
It survived.
It did. While other Viking-influenced languages went extinct or transformed dramatically, Old Norse held strong in its homeland. That's not to say it didn't change. Language is always evolving, but those changes happened more gradually, laying the groundwork for what we now know as Norwegian.
So in a way, learning Norwegian today is like having a direct link to the language of the Vikings. That's pretty incredible. But I'm guessing the story doesn't end there, does it?
Not at all. This is where things get even more interesting. You see, while Old Norse was holding strong, another force was about to enter the picture, one that would leave a lasting impact on the language. The Danes.
Okay, so we've got Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, holding strong in Norway, evolving over time, and then the Danes show up. What happens next? I'm picturing like Viking longships battling Danish warships, but something tells me this linguistic showdown was a bit more subtle.
You could say that. Instead of a full-on invasion, it was more of a slow and steady influence. In the late Middle Ages, Norway and Denmark entered into a political union, and over time, Danish began to have a major impact on the language.
So less of a hostile takeover and more of a linguistic merger.
Exactly. Danish became the language of power, of administration, of education. Think about it like this. If you were Norwegian back then and wanted to get ahead in life, you needed to know Danish.
So people started using Danish words and grammar more and more, even in their everyday speech. Huh. It's amazing how much influence politics can have on language when you think about it.
It's a fascinating interplay of power and culture. And, you know, we see this happen throughout history. Look at the Norman conquest of England, for example.
Right. William the Conqueror comes in, brings his Norman French with him, and all of a sudden English gets a whole lot more French.
Precisely. It's why English has so many words of French origin, especially in areas like law, government, even cuisine.
Okay, so back to Norway. We've got this blend of Old Norse evolving naturally. but now with the strong Danish influence seeping in, especially among the educated classes. I mean, what did Norwegians think about all this? I'm guessing some weren't too thrilled about their language being, sidelined.
You're right, not everyone was on board with this linguistic shift. And as Norway began to assert its own national identity in the 19th century, the desire for a more uniquely Norwegian language gained momentum. That's where our linguistic heroes enter the picture. Knud Knudsen and Ivar Assem.
Two guys, one mission. Save the Norwegian language. This is getting good. Tell me everything.
Well, imagine it's the 1800s and Norwegian nationalism is on the rise. Knudsen and Eisen both recognized the need for change, but they had very different visions for how to achieve it.
Okay, two sides of the same coin. Who was first out the gate?
Knud Knudsen, a schoolteacher and language reformer, was a pragmatist. He saw that this blend of Danish and Norwegian, which had become known as Dano-Norwegian, was deeply entrenched in society, especially among the upper classes.
So instead of a radical overhaul, he wanted to make Dano-Norwegian more Norwegian from the inside out.
Exactly. He advocated for reforms in spelling and grammar, bringing them closer to how people actually spoke. Think of it like giving the language a bit of a Norwegian makeover.
A linguistic nip and tuck to restore some of its original character. I like it. Okay, that's Knudsen the reformer. What about Ivar Aasen? What was his take on all this?
Aasen was a different breed altogether. This man was a linguistic revolutionary. He believed that Norway needed a written language that was purely authentically Norwegian, free from any Danish influence.
Wow, he was going for a clean break.
Yeah.
That's a pretty bold stance to take.
It was, and he was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to make it happen. Aasen was a scholar of dialects, and he firmly believed that the true spirit of the Norwegian language was alive and well in the rural areas where people had preserved older ways of speaking.
Wait, so he traveled around collecting dialects like some kind of linguistic treasure hunter?
Precisely. He spent years going from village to village, listening to how people spoke meticulously, documenting their words, their grammar, their accents. It's said that he walked almost the entire Norwegian coastline on this linguistic pilgrimage.
Talk about dedication. He wasn't just studying the language. He was living it, breathing it, becoming part of its story. So what did he do with this treasure trove of dialects he'd collected?
Aasen took all that he had learned, all the richness and diversity of those dialects, and he created a whole new written language, landsmål, which literally translates to country language.
So now we've got not one, but two competing versions of Norwegian. Bokmål, the reformed Dano-Norwegian, and landsmål, this new language built from the ground up. I can already tell this is where the real linguistic battle begins.
You could say that. Buckle up, because things are about to get very interesting.
Okay, so picture this Norway in the 19th century. You've got Bokmål, the reformed Dano-Norwegian, kind of holding court in the cities and universities. And then you've got landsmål, this new kid on the block, championed by Ivar Aasen and his crew of rural dialect enthusiasts.
Yeah.
So what happened next? Was there like a big linguistic duel at dawn?
It wasn't quite a duel, but it was definitely a clash of cultures and identities. You see, language is about so much more than just words and grammar. It's about who we are, where we come from, what we value.
So this wasn't just about like which version of Norwegian was better. It was about what it meant to be Norwegian in a newly independent nation.
Exactly. Imagine the debates, the newspaper articles, the heated discussions at family dinners. Should Norway embrace its Danish heritage with bokmål or forge a new path with landsmål, this language rooted in the dialects of the people? It was a question that divided the nation.
Wow, it's incredible how language can become such a powerful symbol. So who ultimately won this linguistic battle?
Well, if you were looking at just sheer numbers, bokmål definitely came out ahead. It became the more widely used of the two, especially in government education, the media. But to say landsmål just disappeared, that's not true either. It found a stronghold, particularly in the western parts of Norway, where those traditional dialects were strongest.
So even with all those tensions, Norway ended up embracing both forms of the language. That's actually kind of beautiful when you think about it. Two branches of the same linguistic tree, each with its own unique history and character.
It's a testament to the idea that language doesn't always have to be about uniformity. You know, diversity can be a source of strength, a reflection of a nation's rich cultural tapestry.
And speaking of tapestry, I have to bring up those tones we mentioned earlier. You said Norwegian have tones like Chinese. That sounds almost musical.
It is. It's one of the most distinctive features of Norwegian and something that often takes language learners by surprise.
Well, consider me surprised. So how does it work? Does every single word have a different tone?
Not every word, no. But there are plenty of examples where the tone is essential for understanding the meaning. For example, take the word bønder. If you say it with a flat tone, it means farmers. But change that tone, make it a little higher at the end, and suddenly it means beans or even prayers.
Get out. No way. The same word, two completely different meanings, all because of how you shift your voice. I'm starting to see why you called Norwegian a puzzle box earlier.
And just like any good puzzle box, there are even more layers to uncover. We haven't even touched on those wonderfully long compound words that Norwegian is famous for, or the sheer diversity of dialects spoken across the country.
Man, you're telling me there's even more to this language?
Yeah.
I am hooked. This deep dive has been amazing. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what makes Norwegian so fascinating.
And that's the beauty of language learning, isn't it? There's always more to discover, more to understand, more to appreciate. As you continue your own exploration of Norwegian, think about this. How will these two official languages, Bokmål and what is now known as Nynorsk, how will they continue to evolve? Will they grow closer together, or will their differences become even more pronounced? It's a question I don't think anyone has a clear answer to, but one worth pondering as you delve deeper into this remarkable language.
Absolutely. And for our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and most importantly, have fun with it. Till next time, happy language learning.